If you've seen a few of my previous videos, you know how I feel about the Nikon ZF. Phenomenal camera, highly capable, and probably still a bit underrated. When I had it on loan from Nikon USA this summer, I had the 40mm f2 Special Edition lens with it, and I was a big fan. But now that I have my own ZF, the first prime I paired with it was actually a budget lens from 7 Artisans that punches well above its price. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Chris Hagan, a video producer and photographer in Portland, Oregon, and I know what you're thinking. Premium cameras deserve premium lenses. But allow me to make the case for saving some money, especially as everything else within photography gets more expensive on the new and used market. 7 Artisans 24mm f1.8 is a $329 lens that hit the market earlier this year for Sony's full-frame E-mount, and now it's available for Nikon on the Z-mount as well, which is in real need of more quality third-party autofocus lenses for consumers that do want to save a bit of cash. To my knowledge, at the time of putting this video out, I think the only other 24mm autofocus option is Nikon's own 24 f1.8s lens, which costs 3 times as much as this one from 7 Artisans. Feel free to check me in the comments though if I'm wrong. While I don't have that Nikon prime to compare to, I have been shooting a lot on Nikon's 24-70 f2.8s Mark I on both my ZF and the Z8 I have on loan from Nikon USA right now. It is a very sharp lens and probably the best 24-70 I've ever used. So I'll have my observations from using both of those around the same time, and I think the 24-70 can serve as a good reference point for how sharp the 24mm from 7 Artisans is. Also, speaking of the Z8, one of the features 7 Artisans notes about this 24mm prime is that it can resolve high megapixel sensors, and I think you'll be very impressed by how it handled that 45 megapixel sensor in a variety of scenarios. So we might as well jump in with image quality, right? That's what we want to know here. I do have takes on the build quality, but we'll save those for later. The first thing to note with 24mm, even if you've never shot on a prime lens before, is you're probably already comfortable with that focal length, but you may not know it. The most recommended lens to start with for those taking their photography a little more seriously, for good reason, is a 24-70. If not, maybe a 24-105 or 24-50 or maybe a 24-200. Nikon and other brands make all of those lenses, and the common denominator is 24mm on the wide end. Now, I don't know the exact percentages, but I'd venture to guess that most of my photos when shooting with a 24-70 are either at 24 or 70. All that to say, shooting with this 24mm prime felt very familiar immediately and has the benefit of being faster than the standard 24-70 zoom. My first weekend with the 7 Artisans 24mm was while family was visiting, and it made for a great lens to have on the Nikon ZF for all of these family moments and just going around the city. It did a great job indoors in low light, and walking around outdoors, it's great for capturing the entire scene and some wider portraits on occasion. And what I like about this focal length specifically is how easy it is to use. The best analogy I can think of is it's kind of like your favorite shirt. It's not too tight like a 50mm might be for everyday photos, but it's also not too baggy and loose, leading to a sloppy appearance like you might get from something like a 20mm or wider that shows just a bit too much of the scene. 24mm is loose enough to be comfortable to wear whether you're in summer bod or winter bod mode, but it also gives a classy appearance, especially shooting wide open and getting a bit of that classy background blur to the image. Shooting wide open also brings in a little bit of an interesting character with how the focus rolls off. At f1.8, you go from in to out of focus in a hurry. To my eye, it feels just a little less gradual than some of the other primes I've used, like Sony's 35mm 1.4, for example. That one just pops in my head because it's probably the most used lens I own. To be fair, that's a high-end lens that costs 4 times as much and is generally regarded as one of the best 35s available on any mount, but I just wanted to point that out. It's mainly noticeable on close-up shots though. For medium and obviously wide photos, it's really not an issue, and it may be something you learn to like. For me, however, when walking around a few San Diego neighborhoods on vacation, I preferred closing the aperture down to around f2.8 or f4, where not only is the vignetting handled much better and basically non-existent, but the images are also incredibly sharp. I'm showing a mix of Lightroom edits and some of the images straight out of camera, although on both the ZF and Z8, I use image and cloud recipes on the JPEGs, so everything here has been at least a little bit altered. We'll get to some of the raw images later, but the point is, the lens is optically fantastic for the price, especially if you're going to be editing the photos. What else could you ask for from this lens from an image quality standpoint? That's not rhetorical either. Let me know in the comments what you think. This 24mm from 7 Artisans does well on the Nikon ZF and Z8 with their autofocus systems. You can feel, and if you listen closely, hear the motors in it working during the few occasions where it was less sure of what to focus on. It's not as quiet as some of Nikon's S lenses, which are premium, but it was still very accurate even in low light, which again is a huge benefit of shooting with a prime lens. The extra light when shooting wide open goes a long way. Paired with the Z8, I made some of my favorite shots of our trip to San Diego with this prime lens, and it's certainly earned a place in my travel bag. So now we're at the desk to take a look at some of the raw images within Lightroom, obviously without the Nikon imaging recipes applied and without my edits applied to the final image too. Just a closer look at how the lens performs optically, just sensor and lens. Also, since I haven't really had too much of a chance to shoot video in the field with this lens yet, I wanted to give just a little bit of an example of how that looks, especially in terms of autofocus performance. And I think it's getting a decent stress test right now, just in terms of catching my eye and not the glasses in front of my eye. I'll let you guys be the judge of how that looks. I can't really tell right now, just looking at an LCD flip out screen, but I'll see better when I can eventually look at it on a big monitor. The lens is on the Nikon ZF on my desk right now, and I'm actually using this new 5-in-1 tripod from Freewell. I'll have a video on this thing coming eventually. This is its desk mode. It's actually a full tripod, but this is one of those 5 modes, and honestly, it has some features that I don't think we've really seen in a tripod before. But no more delay, let's jump in and take a look at some of these raw images within Lightroom. So the first thing I want to talk about is vignetting and explain why I think it's a bit of a moot point. This is a raw image. Obviously, there's a bit of vignetting. When we look at the corners, we can see it's a little darker. However, we do have the lens profile correction available in Lightroom. So as soon as I do that, we've already cleaned this up significantly. It's also worth noting that the wider you go, the more susceptible the lens is going to be to vignetting just naturally because of physics. And if you have any filters on the front of the lens or even a lens hood, and the way the light hits that can affect the vignetting of an image. Even some of the best lenses available, like this incredible 50mm f1.8s from Nikon, are going to show a little bit of vignetting sometimes when you're shooting wide open. That's just kind of the physics of how this stuff works. And you can see it on this image shot with that 50. I've got the profile corrections turned on, but as soon as I turn it off, there is clear vignetting in the corners. So going back to the 24mm f1.8 from 7 Artisans, it doesn't surprise me, nor does it bother me that there is vignetting when shooting wide open, considering this is a budget lens compared to an S-line lens like you'd see from Nikon. This image here, enable profile corrections is selected right now. As soon as I uncheck that, we see the vignetting. I think it's well controlled compared to a lot of other budget lenses that I've seen. Now, if you're taking the images straight out of camera and not doing any additional editing, that's where some vignetting may show up a little bit more. In that case, I definitely advise stopping down where you can to avoid it. But since we do have that USB port available on the lens mount, maybe that's something that can be improved via firmware update. So if you are a JPEG shooter, just beware that you might have a little bit more vignetting show up because it's not correcting for that within the camera. But saying all that, I don't want to take away from my main point, which is I really enjoyed using this 24mm lens, even on something like the Nikon Z8, where you're not going to be able to hide many flaws from that 45 megapixel sensor. This is one of the photos from the Z8 shot at f4, and it was one of my favorite of the entire trip just because of all the color and detail from all of these toys mounted on the wall. This little blue guy in the middle was my focus point, but you know, you can see a lot of what's going on behind it. And I think the lens did a really good job of resolving the details of this image. Everything's pretty sharp to me. And then once I apply the edit, obviously the goal here was just to really punch up the color and bring all of that out. Again, one of my favorite shots of the entire trip, because I feel like most of my photos don't look like this. Actually, they're a little bit more muted most of the time. Just a couple more to show here. We're back in the war zone of Portland in this one, and nothing special going on. I did kind of like the lighting, but it is a good example of how the lens maintains contrast even with the sun shining straight into it. This is the raw photo. I don't think much looks washed out outside of, you know, what's directly around the sunlight here. And then as I applied the edit, I brought some of the contrast back, punched up the color a little bit, warmed it up, but I think it's a nice shot. I think this lens can really deliver in a variety of conditions. Similar scenario here, another backlit photo of my daughter playing on the jungle gym at the park. And I really do like backlit images. I think it adds a lot more shape to the photo. But again, I don't think much of it was washed out outside of obviously where the sun's beaming through. And in the edit, just warmed it up a little bit, brought back some of that contrast. And I really like this photo, and I really like using wide angle primes for this reason, because you can get so close to the subject, still get the environment in it, but then still bring your subject out of that environment because it's such a fast aperture when you're shooting wide open at f1.8. Finally, even though it's kind of comparing apples and oranges, because the 7 Artisans 24mm is a prime lens and this photo was taken with a zoom lens, Nikon's 24-70 f2.8s, I just want to show that even the best of the best lenses can be prone to vignetting at the wide end. This is the raw image. The profile correction is turned on, but when I turn it off, again, you get some vignetting at the corners. You even get a little bit of distortion. And when we turn the profile correction back on, things look a whole lot better. So I wouldn't knock this lens for that, and I certainly wouldn't knock a $329 7 Artisans 24mm budget lens for that either. I'm sure there are more detail-focused YouTubers and photographers and reviewers who may be able to find some flaws that I'm just not looking for, or that maybe I'm not aware of with this 7 Artisans 24mm lens, but I'm just someone that enjoys it for taking photos, enjoys it for an everyday carry as a light, wide prime that gives me some options that other lenses don't. So now let's talk about design. For the most part, I think it's really solid, literally and figuratively. At this price point, 7 Artisans probably could have gotten away with not including an aperture ring, but they did include one, and it feels good to use. It's clickless, which video shooters will appreciate, and can be locked into the auto position if you twist it all the way there. There's no actual physical lock switch, but I never found that to be an issue and never bumped it out of the auto position by mistake. You do, however, have a physical function button and an autofocus manual focus switch. And even with the metal construction of the barrel, I wouldn't say it's a heavy lens. It felt good on the ZF and even better on the Z8. Honestly, every lens pairs well with the Z8 because the grip is just so deep and comfortable. That's actually a topic for a future video. The only thing 7 Artisans didn't include on the wish list is weather sealing. And I guess as a budget option, you've got to draw the line on what to put and what not to put in a $329 lens somewhere. But is it that expensive to put just a little something there to give the mount a little protection? I don't know. That's just me thinking out loud. The moral of the story with this lens is it's safe to believe the hype. It's a good one at a great price. I think if you have a 24-70 and you want to carry around something lighter for casual photography, it's a good one to add to the bag. The perfect pairing to me would be with Tamron's 35-150. The biggest drawback with that lens, besides its size, is not being able to go any wider than 35mm. But if you have this lens in the bag or on a second camera body, problem solved. I honestly didn't even expect to like this lens as much as I do, but here we are. As I continue to build out my Nikon kit, it is going to be in my bag, and it keeps me from being tempted to pick up a 20mm lens because I think I do just like 24 and being a little bit tighter a little bit more. Thanks for watching, guys. If you do want to pick up the 7 Artisans 24mm f1.8, check out the link in the description. It helps support the channel, and it is always very much appreciated. Let me know what you think about this budget lens and if you're considering one, and I'll see you in the next video.